Join us on a journey toward a freer world through sound economic policy and a love for individual freedom. Welcome to Free the World.
Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Free the World, a show by Students for Liberty, where we explore the ideas and the truths, the policies that set us free and make a freer society and a freer world. I'm your host, Josh Eckel, the Global Marketing Director here at Students for Liberty. And today we have a great guest on the show who's going to discuss a broad concept specifically around human respect and how it can lead modern activism and improve lives and really change the world for the better. Before I bring him on, I want to remind everyone that we just recently announced LibertyCon, the announcement for our flagship conference that happens every year. We're going to have that this year in Washington, D.C., the Westin downtown, February 7th. We're going to have great speakers like Spike Cohen, who will be on the show here in a second, Tom Palmer, Brian Kaplan, John Mackey, David Friedman. We have plenty of extra speakers in the wings that we're going to be announcing soon. So check out libertycon.com to get your tickets before the price increases again. But without further ado, let's talk about human respect. I'll bring on our guest, Spike Cohen. Spike?
Hi.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. So for anyone who's not aware, Spike is the successful business owner. He's a libertarian activist. He's a media figure. He was also the vice presidential nominee of the Libertarian Party in 2020 and the founder and president of You Are the Power, which is a nonprofit focused on using solutions-oriented activism to grow the liberty movement and improve lives. I appreciate the work you're doing, Spike. Today, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the work you do at You Are the Power. But before we do that, I kind of want to just frame the conversation, and then we'll kind of get into some of the nuance and the questions. So
sure.
I think the big question that we wanted to address in this episode was how can we show that pro-liberty ideas positively impact communities, especially among those that maybe don't embrace pro-liberty ideas? One of the things that you talk a lot about, and a lot of the people in our orbit talk a lot about, is this concept of human respect in general. Yeah. And, you know, human respect sounds like a pretty simple concept, but I think there's a lot to unpack with that. So I wanted to kick us off by talking a bit about human respect and kind of how it works for people, how it can improve people's lives, and kind of what is the meat behind the concept of human respect.
Yeah, so human respect is something that is intrinsic to just about all of us. In fact, it's one of the defining things of what makes someone not a sociopath or a psychopath or a politician, but I repeat myself. But all of us have this sort of intrinsic respect for the fact that every one of us is an individual human being. It's why we're able to go out into the world and, go about our daily lives, and we're around sometimes thousands or tens of thousands of complete and total strangers. And we have a relative reasonable expectation that no one is going to harm us. We're not just playing the numbers. We recognize that the vast majority of people have no desire to do that because we're human beings. Now, as we're doing that, we're walking around, we're probably stepping on God knows how many insects and displacing how many, who knows how many animals, but those aren't human beings. And so we don't put them in the same category. This is something that is so intrinsic to us, so hardwired into us, that we don't even really have to talk about it. It's something that we don't even really have to usually even discuss. The problem is we've been conditioned to believe that human respect doesn't have to apply when it comes to the government. Politicians and bureaucrats and enforcers are given this weird set aside, this pass to not respect us as individual human beings. But we don't apply that to, like, for example, if someone were to try to rob you or harm you in the private sector, someone outside of government, even that exact same government official, out of their capacity as a government official, if they were to harm you, you would fight back, or you would ask, call for help, or you would, try to run away, or if you did comply, it would be under duress, but you would recognize something bad was happening there. But we have this weird set aside, or the vast majority of us have this weird set aside when it comes to the government. And so what I'm doing in my work with You Are the Power, and in all of the messaging that I do on social media and in interviews and everything else, is to remind people that the government is just a bunch of human beings, and that we should expect them to respect us as individual human beings, because it's only with that individual human respect that we can be at our most prosperous, our most harmonious, and ultimately our happiest.
All that makes sense. It is a little bit crazy how, when it comes to the government, that the conversation about respect and force kind of gets pushed to the side. So that's an incredibly important thing to think about. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I think we wanted to talk about on the kind of in the undertones of this conversation about human respect is kind of how basically the application of when that concept gets thrown out the window,
Yeah.
right? So we want to talk
Yeah.
about perverse incentives, origins to those perverse incentives, how to prevent them, things like that. So one of the things that I see with You Are the Power is you guys go across the country locally, and you, especially seen stories from you guys out of West Virginia, Ohio, South Carolina, where you guys take on city ordinances. And one of the city ordinances, or I think you've done this in a couple different areas, is focus on getting rid or fighting ordinances at the local level that make it illegal to feed the homeless. I mean, it's such a crazy concept, I think, to most people, that there are ordinances like this that exist. And the fact that there's even pushback to trying to repeal them, it's kind of shocking to me that these laws are even on the books. So I think the first question I wanted to have to talk about this concept was, what is the origin of these laws? How do they get written, and where the hell do they come from?
Yeah, so very often the way they're written is actually even more insanely broad. It is illegal to feed someone without a permit. They don't say the homeless, because then there's this, arbitrary definition of what is or isn't homeless. They just say, if you're in public, you can't feed another human being unless you have a license to do so. Now, as insane as that is the law, or the rule that's on the book for just about every major municipality in this country. I think it probably started. I'd like to think it started from a good place, that they were worried about the potential health concerns, or that they were worried about what happens if you are feeding homeless people, and so now they're congregating in specific areas, and there's not a cleanup afterwards and things like that. But all of that can be addressed by, for example, requiring that people clean up after themselves, which are also laws that are on the books. You're not allowed to litter. You're not allowed to use the bathroom publicly. You're not allowed to make a mess and not clean up after it. So this was sort of an overreach from that. But what's happening now is and going to your what you said about perverse incentives. What's happening is these local city councils and these county governments, they're spending millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars, working with selected NGOs and nonprofits in their area to solve the homelessness crisis. Well, if there's a bunch of people that are going out and doing it with voluntarily raised funds, just charities and nonprofits doing it on their own, the government doesn't have that crisis to grift off of. They can't say, we need to take more money from you to solve this crisis. So they basically put their competition out of business by threatening to arrest them, while simultaneously giving taxpayer money to this organization that they've tapped to do it. And so in this, what started as, or what we were told was this attempt to help the homeless, ends up turning into threatening to arrest and fine people for helping other people.
I see. So, yeah, that all makes sense. So the practical application of it, it's kind of incredibly destructive. So
Yeah.
obviously you've been spending time to go across the country and kind of fight these at the local level. What are the tactics that you've learned in your experiences or your team's experience to kind of get these laws changed or removed?
Yeah, so the first time we find out about any cause, anytime that we find someone that's being abused by their local government or their state government, the first thing we do is vet it heavily. We want to make sure we have all the facts. We're not going off half-cocked or taking on a cause that isn't real or isn't true. And then once we've done that, we put together a plan of action of how to address it. And the first thing we do is what we call a swarming method. We put out viral content on social media explaining this issue, and we don't explain it as a policy. We focus on individual human beings and individual charities and groups of people that are being harmed by this. So we make it a story about human beings. We don't get political or philosophical about it, at least not initially. We just talk about these human beings. And once we now have tens, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people who are outraged about this, we're giving them an immediate call to action to, I like to call it, cyberbullying these government officials. We invite people to go in and fill up their email inboxes and their voicemail inboxes and their social media mentions and all of their posts on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else, and let them know we're watching what you're doing, we don't like it, and we want you to put an end to it. And we keep doing that until they back off. And if for the rare times that doesn't work, we then actually organize in-person rallies where we have local members of that community show up to that city council meeting or zoning board meeting or whatever, whoever it is we're targeting, and talk to them directly. So if having thousands of people angrily telling them to back off online wasn't enough, now having dozens or sometimes hundreds of people show up in person telling them to back off almost always works. We have nearly a 90% success rate.
Yeah, and the impact of that is pretty significant. I mean, a lot of the times people don't realize just how much the local politics and local ordinances can really affect day-to-day life. So that makes a lot of sense. It's very, very powerful. All right, so I want to zoom out a little bit for the next segment of this and talk a bit about the big picture. So I think these same concepts, right? These concepts of these perverse incentives, I should say, that we see at the local level, you can scale them all the way up to the federal government and beyond. So one of the things that I think we at Students for Liberty believe, and I think most people understand intuitively, is this idea that if you give the government authority or power, there's always a likelihood and possibility it's going to get abused. I mean, in many cases, it does get abused and it affects people's lives, like what we saw locally with some of these local ordinances. And a lot of the times these laws can start from a position of good intentions and then kind of completely spiral out of control and become something that's completely destructive. So there are obviously a lot of examples. I think the people of the kind of classical liberal or libertarian tradition would point to things like qualified immunity. I mean, red flag laws. We could talk about all these different things, but can you maybe give me some examples of things that you think citizens should be cautious of just other kind of examples of maybe perverse incentives that we see across the country?
Yeah, so I can actually give you a litmus test, and we can give some examples from that. When government comes to you and says there is this threat, we'll call that X right now, okay? Threat X. And in order to deal with threat X, we need this new law or this new agency or this new authority to do certain actions, and then we'll be able to deal with threat X. It doesn't matter what threat X is. Look at what it is they're saying that they want to do and ask yourself, do I want that agency, that new power, that new regulation, that new law to be used against me or those that I care about and love? And if the answer is no, which it should be, then you should reject it. We have seen how the Patriot Act, which was explicitly written to go after the specific terrorists that were responsible for 9/11, has now mission creeped its way and grown into this monster Leviathan that has been used most recently to go after angry parents that showed up to school board meetings. We've seen how the income tax, which was supposed to be a very small tax on just the highest earners, is now morphing into the vast majority of the tax, a disproportionate amount of the tax burden being paid by low-level workers and wage workers and gig economy workers. Every time you give government a new power or a new agency or new rule or order or anything else, allow them to do that, you're basically giving them a gun. And they're going to point that gun at you and at those you care about at some point. And so to me, I think it's a very clear thing, especially when government is leading with saying, we need to protect you. That's when you have to reject it.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things that I think is a very powerful, at least psychological experiment is, as you said, I mean, you and I think both of the millennial generation, we saw this happen in the war on terror. All these massive agencies get created and then get weaponized against people. And one of the things that I think more people don't think about, and I think libertarians and classical liberals do a good job of putting this in perspective, is any law, as you said, that or any agency or any power that you give the government will inevitably be used by the political opposition at some point in the future, right? I mean, if you can't operate understanding that dynamic, then you need to take a long-term vision perspective. So that's great conversation or commentary on that. One last thing I want to focus on specifically, going back to perverse incentives and going back to the real harm that the government can kind of creep into people's lives, is around parenting, childcare, things of that nature. So you are the Power have done work with family court cases, and you've shown a light on situations where really egregious situations where families are separated from their children, and they've seen the government intervene in their family affairs in ways that have not been productive or helpful in any way. I am curious as to whether you can give me some context on some of the work that you've done there and how it came about, and then tie it back to maybe the perverse incentive conversation that we talked about and how these laws can get weaponized in ways that are very harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. So mid to late last year, we found out about the first family that we found about, who had a child, have a newborn daughter, who was having some fractures in her legs, which were caused by a documented chronic health issue. When they took their child for the first time to the hospital, didn't know she had a chronic health issue yet. They took her to the hospital. The child abuse pediatrician that was on duty at the time called it abuse, even though the test results demonstrated there was a chronic health problem and that there was no abuse. They then not only did they then take the not only did their child protective services seize that newborn daughter, not only did they also seize their other daughter, their toddler daughter, despite no evidence of any kind of abuse or harm or damage or of any kind to her. They then arrested the father for abuse, multiple felony charges, and as a bond condition, for him to be able to even seek bond, he had to agree not to speak with or be in close contact or live with his wife. So not only did he and his wife, did the mother and father lose their children for no reason, but they were also legally estranged from each other indefinitely. They had to fight to get their kids' medical records in court. They actually had to fight to get it. When they finally got it, they saw that there was a chronic health issue that was causing this. They went to the court. The judge refused to even admit it into the evidence or the testimony, and so they weren't able to see their children. They were facing the risk of never seeing their children again. They were facing this looming criminal prosecution, which never came, because if they actually went to a criminal court, very quickly the whole thing would fall apart, because there's actual due process and a standard of evidence there, unlike in family courts. And then we found out why this is happening when many other families started coming out of the woodwork with the exact same story. We found out that under Title IV of the Social Security Act, the federal government gives money to Child Protective Services and everyone involved in that pipeline as long as they call the case abuse. If they say the case isn't abuse, they get $0. If they say that the case is abuse, they get money. If they then take the child and put it in foster care, they get even more money. If they then take the child and permanently take it from the parent and place it for adoption, they get even more money. And if that child ends up having a chronic illness, they get even more money. You want to talk a perverse incentive? You now have a child abuse pediatrician looking at a newborn child with a documented chronic health problem, and instead of saying we need to get this child the care that it needs, that doctor says, cha-ching, we're going to make so much money from this. That can only happen if that doctor, that caseworker, that family court judge, everyone down the line in so-called child protective services has stopped looking at these children and these parents as individual human beings. They're instead looking at them as a funding opportunity. So that goes back not just to the perverse incentives, but to human respect. When we put these causes out to the public and get the public behind going after these officials and getting these children returned to their families and getting these cases dropped, we are not just getting action for these families and getting positive change for these families. We're demonstrating in our wording and in our messaging, and we're encouraging the people that are going out to spread this message and to go after these officials to also use it in their wording and their messaging, that none of this would happen if they were looking at these individual human beings as individual human beings. And so our fight is not just to roll back perverse incentives and to help those families and help those parents get their children back, but also to demonstrate that we can stop this at its root by demanding human respect. Now, for that family I was telling you about, their names are Matt and Tucky Hernandez. Their children's names are Emma and Aria. Emma and Aria are back now with family. The family court case has been dropped. And after nearly a year, Matt and Tucky are now able to live together as husband and wife. We are working on getting the criminal charges dropped, and all of those officials did a miraculous 180-degree turn roughly around the same time that thousands of people were angrily demanding that they do so. That is what the power of human action is.
Beautiful stuff. Okay. Well, with that said, Spike, I'm going to take it out here and let you maybe talk a little bit more about how if somebody wants to get involved in these types of fights, they can learn more about You Are the Power in your organization, and then we'll close it out with a little bit more. But feel free. If anyone wants to get involved in these types of fights, where do they go?
Go to youarethepower.net. You can become a member today. When you become a member, what happens is you are now on our mailing list. You are put into any of the social media groups that if you use a social media, you can be in that group for that social media. We get you in contact with your regional organizer and your state organizer. We give you the link to be able to download the app so you can get push notifications whenever a new cause goes live or a new call to action goes live. You can be immediately plugged in. From the comfort of your home or wherever you are on your mobile device, you can engage in effective activism that reunites families and ends terrible abuses by local governments and spreading the underlining message of libertarianism, which is respecting people as individual human beings.
Love it. Okay.
YouAreThePower.net.
YouAreThePower.net. Awesome stuff. Check that out if you want to learn more. And if you want to see Spike in person, Spike, you're also going to be at LibertyCon this year.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to see Spike, meet him in person, talk a little bit more about activism, you can, as I said at the beginning, go to libertycon.com to learn more and get your tickets. Purchase those today and see us at DC in February 7th and 8th. And to take us out, Spike, I just wanted to say thank you for your time. Greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Absolutely, man. It's always great to be on. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. One more thing for you guys at home. If you want to learn more or get plugged into Students for Liberty, if you want the tools to take your activism to the next level and get the tools that you need to go out in the world and make a difference to promote liberty ideas, you can go to join the local coordinator program at join.studentsforliberty.org. We are accepting across the globe in the United States. So feel free to get in there if you are interested in taking your career and your future to the next step. I appreciate it. We will see you guys again soon. Have a wonderful afternoon.